Hello and willkommen. This is LeAnna from Wander in Germany, your Germany travel planning expert. Now, I hope you've been following this entire first season of our podcast as I really break down preparing for a trip to Germany. And so you might be surprised that it's only now, almost towards the end of season 1, that I am actually talking about how to plan your perfect itinerary to Germany. But I really do feel that you have to have had all those other pieces that we've discussed in our previous episodes in order to lead up to today's topic of actually idealizing that perfect itinerary. So I hope you're all caught up, and even if not, feel free to listen today and just go back and fill in those insider topics we've already covered later. So today, let's talk about actually planning that trip to Germany. Actually creating an itinerary. There are so many amazing things to do in Germany, so I get it. It can feel super overwhelming, and I know how hard it is to even know where to start, let alone how to plan out a full trip. So I'm going to share with you my exact formula for planning an amazing trip, but more importantly, planning a trip to Germany with ease and as little stress as possible. All while catering it exactly to you, your travel style, what would make the trip most memorable for you. After all, that's what this is all about. It's your trip. So before diving in super hard, I do have to give a little bit of a shameless plug here to myself. I actually have everything we're going to talk about in today's episode all ready for you in a Google Doc. So it's this super organized spreadsheet, and it goes over every single step of planning a trip to Germany. All you need to do is fill it all in, and it will be personalized to you. I know that sounds like some magic stuff, but I promise it's not, because I'm going to lead you through the steps in that Google Doc. So after this episode, instead of creating your own system, just go into Google, type in Wander in Germany trip planning template. So I'll say that again. Just go into Google, and you're going to type in Wander in Germany trip planning template. Now, you're going to find that resource, depending on how difficult Google is being recently. You might have to look a few links down, make sure it's the Wander in Germany trip planning template, and just download it. And it will be your best friend for staying organized, knowing what to plan next, and keeping everything in place. And yes, it is free. All right, so planning an itinerary. How do you even decide where to go? So you've probably seen plenty of beautiful photos on Instagram and Pinterest, maybe TikTok. Maybe you've been looking through the guidebooks or even on blogs already. And there's just so many places that you already are feeling overwhelmed. And you're just wondering, how on earth am I going to fit all of this into a trip? So at this point in your travel planning, I just want you to be a dreamer. And I know that's like my hippie woo-woo side showing, but really, like what you're going to do is you're going to start collecting ideas. So again, this is all in my spreadsheet. I have an entire tab just on this. So as you see an Instagram picture or as you flip through a guidebook, you're just going to simply allow yourself to be wowed or inspired by what you saw. And at this point, we're just going to take note of it. Now, in that template, I actually encourage you to be proactive about this. I mean, depending on when your trip is. For some people, if it's in a few months, you kind of got to do the work right now. If you know you're going on a trip in a year, you could maybe be a little bit more slow about it. But my point is that I try to get you thinking of different possibilities. So I have prompts for you to do things like start to look look into things like food I want to eat in Germany. And just for a day, spend time on Google or Pinterest or TikTok and literally just look for different foods to eat in Germany. Type in things like local German dishes or authentic Bavarian food and just see what comes up and see what looks fun, looks good, and, looks like something you want to try out. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably like, whoa, I haven't even decided where I'm going. Why should I even decide on where or what I should eat? But the reality is that sometimes it's that kind of more, specific research that can lead you down some great insider options for things that you never even knew existed. And you would only find that because you've already started digging without this umbrella of, oh, I have to go here, I have to go there. It just kind of allows for that flow of finding really great information or insider places or things like that. Now, obviously in my spreadsheet, I also prompt you to look for things like towns that will be interesting to you. After all, that's mostly what an itinerary does, is it, obviously formulates the towns you're going to place by place, day by day kind of thing. But also, I encourage you to look for local or cultural events. Maybe they're things that you personally have interest in. Maybe you really do like beer. That's one of the reasons why you're coming to Germany. So start looking into local events. For example, in Bamberg, they have the Hopfgarten, where he has like a local event where you can come and pick hops yourself and see the production of, how to make beer and all those things. But that's only a local event at a certain time of year. So you have to know about those things. So you have to just start Googling. You have to start thinking about, what are my interests? Do you like history? Start making notes of certain places that have significant historical context. Really, you're just taking notes at this point. Really, anything that's specific to you, to your interests, maybe your travel style. Maybe if you have kids, that's going to greatly impact where you want to go. So maybe you're looking for amusement parks because you have kids. My point is at this point, just kind of create basically a dream board. Now, obviously, if you're planning a trip soon, the process of this is going to have to be a little bit faster, and you're going to have to maybe prompt yourself a little bit more rather than somebody who maybe is going in a year and can allow themselves to dream a little bit. But the process is still the same of digging in before even creating an itinerary. All right, so before we can even start mapping anything out, there's a few logistics we need to take care of in order to make an itinerary. So first of all, you need to know what your budget is. You cannot do this before starting an itinerary. So again, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record on this, but in my template, I have an entire budget section, and that's going to help you nail down your finances for this trip. I also obviously have resources on the blog that tells you about, how much to expect to spend on a trip, how much things are for breakfast, lunches, and dinners, and excursions and things like that to help you plan. But this is really important to know, because before we can even start mapping anything out, we need to know how much money you actually have, because that might actually determine how long you stay, where you go. I mean, for example, I talked before in my driving versus train podcast that sometimes different budgets is actually what determines if you should do, rail travel versus car rentals, which that in turn will drastically influence what locations you actually go to, hence the itinerary plan. And number 2, what's your time frame? How many days do you realistically have off work? Is this a time that you're going when your kids have off school? And just knowing what time frames you have is really important. I mean, for example, remember that if you're coming from the US, you're going to leave one day and you're actually going to land in Germany the next day. So for example, if you're leaving December 5th, then you're actually going to land in Germany on the 6th. So it kind of feels like you almost already missed, half a day there. And that's not even taking into account the fact that, you're probably going to be jet lagged, maybe getting to that first destination that first day. And so you have to start to take all of these little bits and pieces into consideration to kind of formulate that time frame. So ultimately, we can't move forward with an actual day-to-day itinerary until we have these 2 things figured out, or at least rough estimates of those 2 things. All right, now, before we go any further, I'm going to put a stop and a hold right here on the planning process. Please, I beg of you, do not cram so much into your itinerary that you're just going to be rushing around and you're not going to even remember anything. That's just really not the proper way to explore Germany. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, look, LeAnna, not everyone can be living in Bavaria like you. I only have 1 week or 10 days, whatever it may be. And this is a trip of a lifetime and I have to fit in as much as possible. Look, I get it. I really, really do. I used to be that person. Before we lived in Germany, my husband and I did backpacking trips and we came to Europe for a month and we literally only had a week in Germany. So I get it. But I beg you, please slow down. The slowness of Germany is actually one of the things that makes this culture so wonderful. And you'd be missing out on, those lazy afternoons at a corner cafe drinking cappuccinos and just people watching, or having a really long lunch at a beer garden next to a river and, not just being rushed. So I know that you want to get as much as you can out of this trip, but don't put so much in that you actually end up not enjoying it. So if you've been following this first season, you actually probably already know like one of the variations of my tagline, which is, wander in Germany, seeing the iconic sights balanced with authentic delights. And I'm a huge believer that some of the best trips do have, those bucket list, checklist items, but then pairing it with some really great off the beaten path ideas, or even just simply slowing down a bit in each location. And sometimes it's that combination and balance that makes the perfect trip. So I get it. You want to go, go, go. You want to see those bucket list items, but please, find a way to slow down, find a way to find, an off the beaten path location to balance out an iconic site so that you feel a little bit more balanced and that you can really appreciate your trip instead of just feeling rushed. Okay, let's start planning. So, we have this list that we've created, right? Like whether you've used my Google template or whether you're using your own or whether you just have a book or a notebook, whatever it may be, we need to start whittling this list down because there's no way that we're going to include everything that we've dreamed up and put on this list. There's no way that that's going to be included in a trip, especially one that might be limited on time. But this list is just something really to start with. So from that list, we're going to start prioritizing what looks like, the must visit places or things to do. You can even start creating a ranking system for you. Top priority gets blue or is, rated number 1. Things that would be nice, but I can skip might be a rated 3. Whatever system makes sense for you, start prioritizing. Okay, so once you kind of have a list of some top priorities, and also those supplemental ones, what we're going to do is we're going to go over into Google Maps. Now, I don't do this on a physical map because most people don't realize, Germany is a quote unquote small country in comparison to something like the US or Canada, but it's not a small country. It's still quite big. It still takes a long time to get places, from one end to the other or side to side. And so doing it online, doing it with Google Maps, you'll start to get a really good picture of like, oh, I didn't realize it took 4 hours to get from this location to the next. Like that's basically a half a day of travel right there. Maybe I shouldn't do that. So go to Google Maps. And at this point, you're going to just start playing with the locations, starting with your top priorities. And you're going to start getting a bearing on where all of these are in relation to one another. And at this point, you can start even putting in, those second priority locations to see if any fit in. Because sometimes even those second priority locations, maybe they're super close to something that was your top priority. And you're like, oh, I actually could add that on really easily or do that as a quick half a day trip or, something just because the proximity of the location. Alternatively, you might find that you found, an insanely gorgeous Instagram photo or something like that. But when you go to plot it out, it's so far out of the way that it just doesn't make sense with your time frame, how much time you have, where else you're going. And you'll just kind of have to put that on your, maybe next time itinerary list. Yes, I legit have Google Notes for like, next time I visit this area. So unfortunately, that's just how trip planning goes. Some things have to be cut. Some things have to be put into the next time list. So really, it's at this point that you're deciding, which cities, which towns, which activities that you want to include in your itinerary to actually ensure that you're seeing what you want to see in that place. So let's say you have Munich. Well, now you're going to have to spend a little bit of time seeing what all there is to do in Munich. Was there something in particular that you wanted to do in Munich? And have you allowed yourself enough time to see, that one thing? Or if you want to see the Black Forest, for example, was there something in the Black Forest that you wanted to see? And logistically speaking, do you have the time to actually not just get there, but get there and enjoy seeing it? That's the key here, folks. You have to enjoy this process. You don't want to be in your car or in a train more than you're actually at a destination and a location, soaking in the culture, soaking in the experiences. I mean, Yeah, it's fun to drive on the Autobahn. And yeah, it can be beautiful on a train ride, but it's the locations that you're here for. So make sure that you've allowed yourself enough time in those locations to really experience what they have to offer. And so, to be honest, it's probably at this time that you're going to have to start asking yourself some tough questions. You're going to begin to eliminate some places. Maybe they're too far from other destinations. Maybe they're too hard to get to by train. Maybe there's just nothing nearby to make it, worth it to put in that extra effort to get there. And sometimes there's really amazing things. Maybe there's really amazing events that you just have to cross off for this particular trip because it doesn't make sense, or it just doesn't fit into the itinerary timeline, whatever it may be, you just have to cross it off. Now, maybe I should take a step back at this point because maybe you haven't even gotten to the point of like where you should go because you're still stuck in overwhelmed city. And again, I get that. For example, I know a lot of people, they'll tack on Germany as part of like a multi-country Europe trip. Like I said, that's what I did the very first time I backpacked in Europe. And in this case, you may only even have just like a few days for Germany. In that case, I highly recommend you just focus on one town. And then maybe that town has like really great day trip options or something like that to really maximize your time. Or, dedicate yourself to a certain region or, area. Like, for example, just go to the Black Forest or just go to Bavaria, which I know is a huge region, but, Bavaria is like where all the stereotypes of Germany go to live. So if you really want to feel like you like experienced quote unquote authentic Germany. And again, I say that kind of laughing because it's like where all the stereotypes are, the lederhosen, the huge pretzels, things like that. Yeah, go to Bavaria, but just spend your time there. Don't worry about going to a ton of other places because again, you're just going to waste your time in the traveling to those instead of actually enjoying it. Otherwise, if you've got the time and maybe you're planning a trip just to Germany, I would say start with a minimum of 7 days if you can. Obviously, up to 2 weeks, even more would be ideal, especially for first timers. And yes, I have all of those itineraries on the blog. And yes, we are going to dissect some of them next week in detail here back on the podcast. Okay, so now you've mapped everything out and you can start using resources like Wander in Germany. Yes, another shameless plug. Like we've gone through all of this and we still haven't even planned out our day-to-day itinerary. But I promise by doing all of those other things and by kind of setting yourself up, now that you've mapped some things out, now you can actually start planning your itinerary and it's going to fall into place pretty quickly and pretty easily, actually. So, of course, I'm going to say to go to somewhere like wanderingermany.com, shameless plug again, because that's going to help you decide, for example, how much time do you need in some of those specific places, or might give you suggestions on day trips and things like that. And honestly, once you have it mapped, once you kind of know a general route of where you want to go, then figuring out the itinerary part, how many days is actually sometimes one of the easier parts because you already have figured out, okay, I know I want to go to X, Y, and Z locations. Now, how much time do I have in each of those places? Now, obviously, this is where sometimes you have to be flexible. Sometimes you really wanted 3 days in Munich, and because you need to go somewhere else or want to add in another location, maybe you knock it down to 2. And I'm sorry again if I'm sounding like a broken record, but this is again where I really encourage you to balance. I know you're going to be tempted to go on the shorter end of things if you're trying to cram as much in as possible. So, if I say on Wander in Germany, please spend 3 days in Munich, you might be like, I'm going to try to get away with 2. That's fine, but don't do that for every location. Please just make sure that, you truly are getting the most out of each place that you're in. And, some places don't need a lot of time. Some places, like I live in Regensburg, and I even say on my blog, I think you really only need 1 day in Regensburg. Can you spend more time here? Sure. But I get it. You're trying to maximize your time. So I'm not saying, you have to stay long in every place, but just make sure you've done your due diligence to, know what is a really good balanced amount of time in each location. All right. So I promise, if you've done all this, you've pretty much created your itinerary. And what I love about this is you've created an itinerary that works for you. It's your budget, it's your interests, it's your personal travel styles. And so the trip is going to be that much better for you because it's for you. You planned it for yourself, but it's very specific. And I promise if you've followed these steps, you are going to have a wonderful trip. And honestly, now that you have your itinerary figured out, the next steps to planning your trip is to really just start filling it in. So, for example, if you don't have flights yet, you can go to flights.google.com and set alerts. If you want to keep an eye on prices, if you don't need to book right away kind of thing. If you need to start booking accommodation, I personally use booking.com a lot. If you are renting a car, you know from that previous episode of the podcast that you'll want to book that early. If you're booking train tickets, you'll know from that episode that you'll probably need some time familiarizing yourself with the best combination of tickets to get around. Again, all of those things on those podcasts and also with even more details on the blog at Wander in Germany. And, then there's things like excursions and day trips. So I do find that things like Viator and Get Your Guide work out well if, you're really reading through the reviews enough. But if you've been around here long enough, I personally love the DIY approach. I rarely will book excursions through Viator and Get Your Guide, but I also can drive. So if you're only doing public transportation, I see those as valuable resources. If you're driving yourself around, I love doing the DIY route when planning trips, especially here in Germany. I mean, that's why I write the way I do on Wander in Germany. I mean, I love that, it's like I go and do all the work for you in planning all these things, figuring out insider tips, giving you step-by-step directions so that all you have to go do is take them and apply it to your own itineraries and then have a really fantastic trip. All right, so I hope that if you're trying to plan a perfect trip to Germany, that you found today's episode helpful. And again, if you want a visual of all of this and you are a trip planning nerd like me and you love this kind of stuff, but you also need it all organized together and easy to plan, just don't forget to go to Google and type in Wander in Germany trip planning template. You're going to find that resource, you're going to download it, and I promise it will be your best friend for staying organized, knowing what to plan next, keeping everything in place. I even have tabs of, after you go and book your hotels, exactly, an easy to visualize tab of, okay, I'm at these hotels these days. I have this transportation these days. So it's perfect for on the go. You can use it as you're traveling as well as in the pre-traveling when you're actually planning. And the best part is if you're traveling with other people, you can also share it with them as well. Now, if you still need a little bit more inspiration to plan your itineraries, then be sure you're subscribed and you've gotten notifications for this Wander in Germany podcast, because next week I'm going to go over some of my own carefully curated and planned out some of my best itineraries for Germany. And we're going to cover those in detail next week. Basically, they are ready to go for you. All you have to do is take it, maybe adapt it to your own maybe budget style or something like that. Maybe add in a day here or there, but it is planned out step by step for you. So make sure you've got your notifications set up so that you're back here next week to hear those specific best itineraries for Germany. And until next time, bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss.